I'm not big on storing for emergencies. I'm big on storing for everyday use that you will happen to have then in an emergency when it shows up.
Welcome to Everyday Homesteading, the show for busy families who want more self-sufficiency without burning out. I'm Josh.
And I'm Carolyn from Homesteading Family. And in every episode, we share time-tested knowledge on topics from growing and preserving your food to raising livestock to herbal medicine and anything homesteading in between.
Let's jump in.
One of the things I've been hearing about a lot lately is people getting back into dehydrating. I think personally the resurgence or the introduction of freeze drying has gotten people thinking about how they can dry foods, but in a cheaper way than getting started with freeze drying, which I think is incredible because dehydrating is actually one of the very first preservation skills that I started with a long time ago. But if you've ever tried dehydrating something, you know that there is a little bit of a trick. And that trick comes when you go to rehydrate it. You need to know how to rehydrate your foods properly so that you can really get the most out of enjoying dehydrating them. Today, I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine, and we're going to be discussing the things that you need to know in order to rehydrate your dehydrated food properly. But before we can jump into that, let's say thank you to today's sponsor. Today's sponsor for this podcast is American Blossom Linens. Now, you guys know that Josh and I love things that last. We love generational things. We love heirloom quality things that you can buy now and they're going to last for a really long time. And that's exactly where American Blossom Linens comes in with their United States grown, processed, shipped, everything else cotton that they turn into the most amazing linens out there. Josh and I are sleeping on them. We have covers on our bed. We have pillows from them. We have sheets from them, and we absolutely love them. I love how they last forever and ever. Like they just keep going. We have worn through other cheaper sheet sets, and these are just completely solid and will go for a very, very long time. So it's one of those things that is so worth it when you can get something of high quality and it can just last for a long time. Not only that, but they get better. They're getting softer every time we wash them, but they're not falling apart. So I want to make sure you go and check them out. They are actually offering you a 20% discount, which is amazing. So go check them out at AmericanBlossomLinens.com. And I'll have a link for you in the show notes, but make sure you use the coupon code Homesteading Family, squished together is all one word. Again, that's Homesteading Family for your 20% off. And thank you, American Blossom Linens. Okay, you guys. So dehydrating and rehydrating that dehydrated food. Getting it right is really important because if you don't like the food that you have dehydrated, your family's not going to be thrilled to eat it. So I've invited a friend of mine, Darcy Baldwin from the Purposeful Pantry, to talk about rehydrating your dehydrated food so that you absolutely love it. So let's go hang out with Darcy.
I started dehydrating when I was newly married with a family, a couple of small kids, and we were pretty poor. We were living on one income, and it was a hard time for us with purchasing groceries and trying to stay stocked. And so when I started trying to learn how to do better about keeping my freezer full and some more food on the pantry shelves for us, I noticed that I was doing really great by buying all of the sales from the store when I could get things on sale, but I was running out of freezer space. And so I just found that I needed to find another way to keep food on the pantry shelf for us. So I started researching. So I was at the library and I was talking to people, and the best that I could do was just trying to learn all of the preservation methods. And so I settled on dehydrating because it was the easiest, uh, most hands-on thing for me. When I had little ones, I really wasn't interested in trying to can. I'd done it with my grandmother years ago. And I remembered what it was like with her. It's like, I don't want to do that with little kids around because I need to be able to focus on the canner. And I'm not really great at multitasking. I need to be on a one task thing because my brain likes to just jump around everywhere. So it turned out that dehydrating was the thing that allowed me to save things in a way that I could keep them going. And I didn't sit and fuss over it, and I could put food up. And I couldn't put everything like if I got a lasagna on sale, I couldn't really put it away for me. But that's what I spent my freezer space on, was to make sure that I had meat, that I had cheese, because we ate a lot of cheese, and that I had lasagnas that were pre-made, because that's kind of one of those things I hate having to make myself. So that's what it was saved for, was the important stuff and the ice cream. So I used everything else that I could to dry, if I could do that. So over time, as the internet came around and I was researching more and finding things that I could try, I just started experimenting for myself, because I found that even though I was drying things, I have two very picky eaters, and it turns out both are on the spectrum, that we didn't know it at the time. So texture issues and things became an issue with trying to get them fed. So one day I was playing around with it and started powdering things, and realized that if I powdered it, it could go in food and they would never notice they were getting the greens that they don't like to eat, vegetables that they don't like to eat. And I could expand the very limited, especially for my youngest son, the very limited menu of things that he will eat. So that's how I started really deep diving into dehydrating at that point, because up to then it had been like drying spinach that I could put in my casseroles, or doing some fruit for snacks for the boys. Those kind of easy, simple things that I would do. We didn't have a garden, so I was just kind of relying on what I would buy. And the powder thing is when I went, that's going to feed my family. And that's going to feed my family in times when we don't have the ability to get food into them that they would eat voluntarily ever. When, a few years ago, when food was a little hard to find for everybody, that's what saved us, is what I had on my shelf in order to be able to do all those things. So it's a means of eating food day by day, which is what we have all the time. And then it was an emergency stash that was set up already, that when we had that happen. Also, back in the past, when my husband had lost his job, that pantry stash that I had is what kept us going until we were, back in the groove of getting income coming back in all the time when I wasn't working yet. So it's been years of playing and experimenting and finding that while I am not a great cook, I don't do big fancy meals. I don't do big fancy dehydrated things that, like I have 14 ingredients always in a jar ready to make any kind of meal. I do simple ingredients that makes it to where I can use my dehydrated foods at any point, almost no matter what I'm cooking. So I use powders and dried mushrooms and dried peppers and dried onions in my eggs. I do anything that I've got on the stovetop, almost I can throw my dehydrated foods in as an ingredient or as an extra bonus thing that goes in there. So I just found that learning how to use it every single day makes it something I can practice with, and something that I can make sure I'm using all the time, and not keeping it on a shelf and never using it, thinking someday I'll use it in the future. If you don't practice with it, then you're not going to know how to use it when that emergency comes up, and it's going to be a big learning curve really quick.
I love the way that you just have focused on actually living with your dehydrated food instead of, some people, they start thinking food preservation and they're putting up their stash, right?
Right.
It's a little more of a prepper mindset, maybe, of like, okay, I'm going to get my stash built up for emergencies. But I think you touched on something that's just so cool with food preservation, is that you're actually living with food preservation. You're using it and you're eating off of it all the time. You end up with the best of both worlds, because you end up with the emergency stash just because that's what you live with all the time.
Right.
That's really neat. That makes a very working sort of pantry and food storage, because it's
Right.
something that can actually like feed your family every day.
Yeah. And I'm really practical with the things I do. So it's like what I store is what we eat. I don't try to put things up in an emergency for an emergency sometime in the future of things that I know that we're not going to eat, or maybe we'll eat it, like, yeah, I'll try that and I'll just put it up and then maybe we'll find use for it. My stash is pretty limited. I don't have like a whole big collection of food that every food that's ever been made. I don't keep it because we don't eat that way. So it's very, I keep most of it in one bookshelf of that's kind of how I have to, because we don't have space in the pantry. We have a very small house that doesn't have a ton of space. So the foods that are there are the foods that I use all the time. I do have things in my regular pantry, like my herbs, and a few other things that I keep back there. But for the most part, it's right here where I can access it all the time, every day, in big half-gallon jars. That's what I do keep in the pantry. I do have like a shelf on top where I keep the excess of the things that we use. So you're going to find 4 or 5 jars of greens that are up there all the time, because as soon as I see them on sale, then, or for the limited garden space that we have, whenever I take the tops off of everything, it gets dried, then it gets stored up there for however long it takes till we use it, until I rotate through another stash. So yeah, I'm not big on storing for emergencies. I'm big on storing for everyday use that you will happen to have then in an emergency when it shows up.
That is so great. So let me just ask you right now, because freeze drying is gaining popularity,
Mhm.
and it's actually, I think, I don't know if you've seen this, but I actually think it's causing a resurgence in people looking at dehydrating, because they're going, oh my goodness, a freeze dryer is really expensive. What's my introduction step? And while dehydrating and freeze drying are very different things, they give you very different products. They do both dry the food,
Right.
and those foods, you can either eat them dried based on what the food is. Some foods, free dehydrated fruit is a great example. You just
Mhm.
eat that dry, or they can be rehydrated for different purposes. So we're going to actually be really diving into rehydration, because that is a place where people really struggle with their dehydrated food.
Right.
But we don't want to limit it to things like beef jerky and fruit, where you feel like you can just eat it in the dry state. We want to actually be able to live off of whatever our food storage is, and dehydration is just no different than that. But before we dive into that, really quick, Darcy, do you think that dehydrating saves you money?
It saves me tons.
Tons.
Um, Only because the way I do it, because I don't have a big garden. We just don't have the space. And at this time in our life, it's not something that we can do a lot. We have a very small, specific garden for things that we grow, or that things that my dad wants to grow, because my dad lives with us, and so that's kind of like his busy spot. But the last couple of years, it's been hard for us to get in there, or weather has come. Like this year, our garden got completely burned out. It just is not something that is something I can count on. So what I do is I go to the grocery store, and when things are on sale, I stock up then. So I will buy months worth at one time and bring it home and dry it. And then that is what I'm going to eat on for the next however many months that it lasts. So what I'm doing is I'm eating tomorrow's food at today's prices, instead of the inflated price that it probably will become, down the road. And it lets me budget our income in a way that I'm not spending a bunch of extra money on things when the prices are really high. So I practice the method of like stocking up for 6 to 8 weeks of something when it goes on sale. I usually do more than that, because I never know if it's really going to go back on sale, or if that sale price comes back down to what it is today. So I'm always looking at trying to expand that for quite a few months out. The other way it saves money too is the things that we do buy that we don't eat enough of. Before it goes bad, I'm going to throw it in the dehydrator, because that way I'm not throwing out food. Now, I always want to say this to people. If you have a compost pile and you put your food in your compost pile, never feel guilty about that, because I hear a lot of people say, I put it in the compost and I could have dried it instead, and I feel like I wasted food. And it's like, but that compost pile is what is feeding the food that's going to feed your family later. So I never want to say that composting is bad. But before it even makes it to the compost pile, I look at it and say, can we eat this still in a dehydrated state at some point? So I will throw it in the dehydrator. So I've not wasted that food. So I've not spent money on food that we end up not eating because it goes in the trash. And it saves me money in a way of I have food on the pantry shelf all the time that if we're sick, or if our schedule has made it to where I didn't plan well and we don't have a meal ready for a night that all of a sudden we found out we're really busy, I can grab something off the shelf and put it on there instead of eating out, which we don't not ever eat out, but it saves me from saying, oh, it's just easier to run through a drive-through and get something and bring it home than it is for me to say, well, it's going to be soup night. We're going to throw soup on, let it, and I don't have to do anything. So it saves me that time and the money because I didn't go out to eat. So.
Oh, I love it. That is so good. Just that last bit about, not having to run out and grab the convenience meals on those busy days, that alone can save you like literally hundreds of dollars a month, depending on what your habit is.
So and for our family, it's at least $60 to $70 to eat at a fast food place, not even a restaurant, but just to go through McDonald's or something like that. It would cost us $60 or $70 a meal because we've got 5 adults that need to be fed. So, and for people with bigger families, that's even more. So that saves a lot.
It saves a lot. You kind of touched on this for a second there, but does dehydrating save you time?
For me, yes. Because I don't have to do prep work, which to me is one of the worst things that I do when I'm cooking is the time that it takes for me to get things ready. One of the things that I do is I spend a lot of time and a lot of money on frozen foods. Again, because we don't have the garden, I can't just readily go get food out of the backyard. And we don't have access to a lot of farmers in my area. So we don't do a lot of farmers markets because they're more, I'm not knocking them for this, but they're more artsy markets than they actually are real food. They're more of, bread and oils and all that kind of stuff. So trying to find people who actually sell vegetables here that we would eat is hard. And especially fruit, because in Texas, you get peaches, and you get some watermelon and strawberries for a very brief time. Our strawberries aren't that great, but getting fruit here is a little harder. So I rely heavily on frozen foods. So when I bring the frozen foods home, all I have to do is open a package and throw it in the dehydrator. And because all the prep work is done, they're cut, they're blanched, they're ready to go. So then when I'm pulling it off a shelf, I don't have to do anything to it. So it's just take the food out, throw it in my casserole or the stovetop meal, or whatever I'm making. I didn't have to prep it. I didn't have to do anything to it. And so the amount of time for a meal like that for me is huge, because that's probably my least favorite. Well, other than planning it, that's my least favorite thing, is to sit and have to cut things all the time when I could be using that time for something different. So yeah, that's the time it saves me.
It saves time. I love that. Just having those meals that are like the pieces are already ready to go when you're in a hurry already is so valuable.
Especially for something like a meal in a jar, where you've already got it ready. It's all you have to do is pour it into a saucepan with some broth, and then that's it. I mean, it's like all of 5 minutes at the most, not even that long, to get it ready to go. So I love those kind of meals.
So you get to do all the work up front when you've got it, or in the case of the frozen vegetables, if you're already getting them in fruits, they're already kind of in shape. You're just putting them out. Yeah. That makes it really easy. And I love that, because sometimes we really get this mindset that like, well, if I'm not growing it, then it's not worth preserving it. Right. And it's just not the case.
It's not at all.
You can start preserving food, even if you're in the middle of the city, even if you're on that second story apartment, like where Josh and I started, and what you have good access to is frozen foods from the grocery store, and you can wait till they're on sale and get them at a discount. I mean, that's a win right there. You're saving time and money. That's great. And you're learning a skill on top of it. So I love that. I think that's amazing.
And the thing that some people also worry about is if you buy frozen food, that it's not as good as fresh. But when you live in a city that you don't have, that people aren't growing the food right near you, the frozen food is actually probably fresher than the stuff that you find in the produce section, because as soon as it's picked, it gets shipped off to a plant right by where they're growing all that food and frozen right then. So it's usually frozen within 2 days. Usually, maybe not quite that, but usually it's frozen within 2 days. And it didn't get shipped from around the world. So it is not the stuff that's been in a storage container being forced to not ripen, or it's not like on day 15 by the time it hits your grocery store shelf. It was within 2 days. It was picked and frozen and ready to go. So it's probably the freshest food that you're probably going to get in a lot of grocery stores.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It really is picked at the best state
Yeah.
that it can be in, and it's dealt with very quickly, flash frozen usually. Okay, so I really want to dive into rehydrating because
Sure.
this is where I think people, again, they get really hung up on this idea, including myself. Back when I was starting to dehydrate, I actually got my dehydrator just to be able to do sprouted grains. So I
Mm,
would sprout them and then I'd dehydrate them and then I would grind them into a flour. So quite a
mm,
process. And that worked really well. But then I have this great dehydrator sitting there. So I'm like, I want to learn how to do more.
mm.
And so, it was really easy for me to take the leap into fruit because that's pretty straightforward. And then, we did a lot of jerkies of different sorts so that we had some high protein snacks. But beyond that, I always felt a little stuck. Wasn't entirely sure what to do with all of the pieces. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out. And a lot of the reason for that was because of the rehydration phase,
Mhm.
is knowing how to okay, great. I have dehydrated celery. What do I do with it?
With it
How do
now,
I
yeah.
do anything with it? Do you have any basic overall guiding principles that you use when talking about rehydrating dehydrated foods?
Sure. I mean, it will always vary on the kind of food that you have because one thing will rehydrate one way, another thing will rehydrate another way. Some things need to be blanched before they're used because they're just going to have a better texture when it's done. Not only in saving, like for some foods, it helps save the color and it stops there's a thing called the enzymatic process that will make your food go bad on the shelf. Blanching will stop that so that your food stays better. And I wish I had pulled it down. I have some cabbage that I didn't blanch because I typically don't. It needs to be if you do it correctly, but I don't because usually I use it quickly enough. It doesn't matter. Well, I've got one jar that I just found that I haven't used quickly, and it has turned color. It's this kind of gray color that is that not really nice to look at. It'll rehydrate is fine, but some things just need to be to help preserve them so they don't look bad, or it helps them not oxidize. So those things need to be taken into account before you get to the rehydrating process because it will affect how they rehydrate later. Celery is a good case in point when people will dry it just like it is. And then they will rehydrate it for a meal and then just go, it's so hard and it's so stringy. It's like, I don't like it because it just doesn't taste right. It's like, well, because it should have been blanched ahead of time. That will help make it rehydrate better. And there's a trick about destringing celery that makes it not so weird when you rehydrate it too. But with some foods, you might actually want to cook them fully before you rehydrate. For rehydrating, it isn't a matter of just putting a food in a bowl and then putting some water on it and then 5 minutes later it's ready, because it rarely happens that way, because most of those foods need hot water or hot broth to help them absorb that moisture back into them. It helps open up all the cells that have been kind of crushed in the dehydrating process as it shrinks. It will help them absorb better. But the biggest thing on there is that food still needs to be cooked. So just adding water to it doesn't cook the food, it just rehydrates it. So you can't put that food into a meal that you think just take. I do a stovetop meal that I do with spinach and sausage and broth and in some kind of tortellini or something like that. That if I were just to throw a bunch of vegetables in with it as it heats up and then think that those are going to be ready, they're probably not. They're going to be hard and maybe chewy because they didn't get a chance to actually cook if I'm just reheating something. The biggest thing that I do is I usually put, if I'm planning correctly, and I know I'm going to have for dinner the next night, I will usually put that food into a jar and then pour water over it and then put it in my refrigerator, because what that's going to do is just let it slow rehydrate overnight it doesn't need the heat when you're going to let it be there for a while. The part of the problem is putting a food in a bowl with some hot water and thinking it's going to do quickly. It's going to lose the heat. That water is going to lose the heat to the air. And so you're actually not putting hot water in there for long. You're just letting it get lukewarm, and it's not working that way. But when you soak it, it has plenty of time to rehydrate. You might find that when you look at the jar after a couple of hours, all of a sudden that water is gone. because the water has been reabsorbed into all of your pieces. So that is it's not a fast way because it does take sometimes overnight, but it's fast for me because I can just do that, set it aside, and I don't have to worry about when I'm getting ready for the meal oh crud, I need to go and do that now. Putting the meal, further back down the timeline because I didn't get stuff prepped ahead of time. It takes some time to get used to what the texture is like afterwards, and then some experimentation on your part in order to find the way that you like it the best. So for me, mushrooms are a big deal in our house. We are like little hobbits and love mushrooms like crazy. But I don't like the texture of rehydrated dried mushrooms. I never have. So in experimenting, I have found that if I chop my mushrooms up pretty small before I ever dehydrate them, once they've rehydrated, I don't taste that texture as much because it's a small piece. So I don't ever just cut mushrooms in big chunks. I take them down to like little cubes, and I don't do it by hand. I use a chopper kind of thing that helps me, or I use a food processor and just get them ground down. So as they rehydrate, they are less likely to be this big chunk of rubbery textured thing that for me, I don't like. But it took some practice to figure out, so what's going to be the best way for me to do this one to fix it for me. Now, everybody else in our family likes them, but it's a thing for me. So in doing things like celery, it will be an experimentation for you to try something. Do you like it blanched or not blanched? Do you care about the texture of it? If you didn't blanch it, that will save you some time to not have to blanch it ahead of time. But it will depend on how you like it after. So you can practice with those things and then take notes so that the next time that you do it, you know how it worked out in the way you want to do it before. And so something that I always say too then is that I know that a lot of people worry about food waste, and that if they experiment with their food and they don't like it, they've wasted the food. And for me, that's not food waste. That's a learning experience. You're practicing, you're learning so that in the future you do it better each time, and that way you don't waste the food every time because you haven't figured out what it is. You don't like it and you keep reusing it and don't like how it turns out. So you can always put it in the compost pile. You can always rehydrate it if you want to. Dehydrate it again, and then put it aside and use it again if you wanted to. But sometimes if you've done something that you can't use, that wasn't a failure so much as a learning experience. It's great to reframe your mind with that, because I know a lot of people are also afraid to do this because they're afraid they're going to waste the food if they didn't like it. So that's always important to remember. You're playing with your food to teach yourself how to save that food for your family for later. It's important to remember that when you dehydrate food, it doesn't come back like it was fresh. Almost never is it going to come back like that, because you have broken the cellular structure of that food in the drying process. And so that's why it shrinks up. And so when it comes back, rarely does a food ever come back fully like it was when it was fresh. And so that's important to remember before you go into this, because I know a lot of people will say it shrank up so much, and then when it came back, it still wasn't like it was before, and it just looked gross and I didn't like it. Like, if you know that going in, that they're not always going to look exactly the same, it helps you know that end is okay. This is what it's supposed to be like, and that's okay. So always think about using rehydrated foods in a meal, not in a side dish on their own. That will save you so much time later. You can still experiment. You might find foods that you do like on their own, but a lot don't come back. Like, to me, green beans is one of them. I don't think they ever come back as good as what it would have been fresh cooked. So I always know that green beans are going to go in something. They're never going to be a side dish on their own. Carrots, on the other hand, are one of those that can come back pretty much like they were, but it will be an experimentation of whether or not you're going to cook them first and then dehydrate them and see what they're like then, or you blanch them and dry them, or you just dry them as they are. I don't ever recommend that for carrots. They should be cooked in some form before you dry them. But like when I do shredded carrots, I don't blanch them, because to me that's kind of a pain, because all the shreds get out of the colanders and stuff. But they don't last long on a shelf that way. They will turn color and not last. So I know that shredded has to be used up pretty quickly. But in that process for rehydrating, it's always going to be a learning curve for you about whether or not you like the way that something comes out later, or maybe you think you need to cook it ahead of time fully before you dry it again? And do you want it in water or do you want it in broth? Because broth will always give you better flavor. Water kind of can, with some foods, make it taste a little bland. Even if you season it some, it can kind of leach out a little of the flavor. So I try to always use broth instead to rehydrate something if I'm going to do it on its own. If it's going to be something that's going into a big dish, I don't worry so much. I use water often because it's going to get flavored in the big dish that it's in, and so all that big flavor will happen. But if you're going to try it alone, I would use some broth because it will definitely give it better flavor. And when you're rehydrating some fruits, sometimes it's better to rehydrate it in a fruit juice rather than doing it on its own because it will add some of that sweetness that you're expecting, and you're still using something that's going to add some vitamins in with it too.
That's great. That's a lot of really good information there. How would you know if one of the things you're trying to dehydrate would be best to have it like blanched before you start?
Root vegetables should almost always be blanched beforehand. Celery is one of those things that because it gets really hard, you want to do it beforehand. If your family, greens, dark leafy greens, should be blanched ahead of time if you eat a lot of dark leafy greens all the time. Like if you're big on that kind of meal, it probably would benefit you to go ahead and blanch your greens beforehand because eating fresh greens is fine and it's good for us and you're supposed to. But over time, you can start building up oxalic acid, which is in all of those dark leafy greens. And so if you have a stash that is blanched ahead of time, it removes that acid so that you can absorb the minerals and vitamins that's in it better. So in a diet that is rich in dark leafy greens, you want to mix up the kind of greens you're using so that you're not using the same kind every time. But if you eat that way primarily, then the stuff that you want to put up, you might want to blanch ahead of time so that you have a different version of it that you're ingesting in your foods. Now, if you're going to dehydrate those dark leafy greens and they're going to always go into a meal, that is a blanching method. So when they're getting cooked, it's fine. It's like if you know they're going to go into a cooked meal, that will actually do the same thing as a blanching ahead of time. But if you're going to use them primarily to put into smoothies, or if you're going to take them as a pill form, like some people like to put them in pills so that they can ingest it that way because they don't even want to mess with them. You need to think about that part for dark leafy greens because that can be an issue, especially for people with kidney disease. You've got to really do that ahead of time because that can be a real problem for them. Potatoes need to be blanched ahead of time because they will actually oxidize if you put them on a dehydrator without blanching. So what happens is that as you dry them, they start to turn black or really dark, muddy gray, and they look so unappealing. They're still fine to eat. And in the rehydrating process, they may come back with some color, not fully white like they were before, but they may regain some color when you rehydrate, but they're still not going to look great. So it's a visual thing more than it is a dietary thing. They're still good to eat. They just don't look good. And so nobody wants to look at a big jar of like brown, gray looking potatoes because that's just kind of gross. Broccoli, all of the cruciferous vegetables should be blanched ahead of time. And asparagus is one of those things that you should blanch ahead of time as well. So there are charts all over the internet of the foods that should be blanched or not. Or if you're looking at a really good resource, they should tell you ahead of time that this is something that you do as you process it.
So do you think that information is specific to dehydrating, or would it be one of those things that I know for freeze drying, I usually say, if you go find a chart that tells you what vegetables have to be blanched for freezing, that you'll be fine if you just use that. Would that kind of cross
it? It doesn't work exactly with dehydrating only because you have the oxidation with potatoes.
Yes.
Well, I guess you cook them before you put them up. You wouldn't put up raw potatoes, but with dehydrating, you're putting up half done potatoes. They're not fully cooked. So that would be something that might be a little different because you don't really freeze potatoes except, I don't know. I've never frozen potatoes except for mashed. I guess hash browns could be frozen, but they're usually cooked ahead of time too. So freezing would probably be a good rule of thumb. If it has to be blanched or cooked before freezing, that's probably what you want to do for dehydrating. I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, that's good.
That's great. And then you kind of nodded to it, like some foods you can do fast and hot or faster and hot or warm. when you're rehydrating
Oh, rehydrating. Yeah, I
wise?
was thinking about dehydrating. It's like, no, no, no,
Oh,
no. But
no.
yeah, okay, with rehydrating, yeah.
And others long and slow, like in the refrigerator, which I
Right,
think is just, I love that method of like, why worry about it when you can stick it in the night before and just let it kind of go
right,
the long, slow
yeah,
method. But sometimes you are in that hurry and you do want that convenience food.
right.
What is the kind of rule of thumb when you're looking at the temperature for rehydrating foods?
Oh, if you're going to rehydrate fast, you need to do it hot, because that's the heat is going to be there to open up all the cells. They're going to absorb better. They won't fully cook because you need to do that in the cooking process, but that will get them there faster. What I usually do if I really need something fast is I put it in a saucepan with some broth and just simmer it,
Okay.
and let it get started ahead of time if I have that kind of time. If I'm trying to make something that is a slow cook meal, I usually don't have to worry about that happening so quickly. And you could even, like, I make shepherd's pie a lot because we love it. And I don't fully rehydrate vegetables in there because I'll just add a little more liquid to the sauce. And so it will have extra liquid as it cooks to help do that process during cooking. But that's after years of making it, I kind of know when to add the extra in there. But if you have that short span of time, you don't have time to just let it simmer forever. If you let the vegetables simmer separately from as you're prepping the rest of the meal, that often will get you close to what you need to have so that when you're ready to put it in for the meal and then cook it, you're good.
All right, let's talk about fruit. Do you rehydrate fruit?
Rarely.
Okay.
Because we eat it, if the fruit that we have, either it's powdered to use for like flavoring yogurts and things like that, or we eat it like it is. I don't bake. I'm a horrible mother. I'm not a big baker. So I don't rehydrate fruits to make pies, but you can do that. It's not something that I do at home. And the same thing kind of goes where just put it in some water or some fruit juice, depending on how you're going to use it later, and let it soak. It doesn't need heat for fruit because you don't really want to cook it up ahead of time, depending on how you're going to use it, because it may make it too soft to even use for what you want later. You can even rehydrate fruit to make jam and jellies, so you don't have to always use fresh. But I'm not a jelly maker either, so I know there are some fruits that will work better than others for that because you don't. It's experimentation, but I mean, if you want to do some kind of berry jelly, you can just rehydrate whatever berries you have to do that. You don't have to use fresh or frozen. It will change the volume and you won't have all of the same juice that you had before because once you've taken that moisture out, trying to put it back in doesn't create fruit juice. It creates wet fruit. And that's hard to explain. So you may want to adjust your volume and you may want to add a fruit juice to it when you're rehydrating because that does put that back into the mix. What I do bake is like quick muffins and breakfast muffins and stuff like that. I don't do pies because pies are a no-go for me. But when I do quick breads, if I'm using very small pieces of fruit, I don't even rehydrate them before I put them in the bread mix. I do add a little bit more moisture, and depending on that fruit, they will usually do just fine. But if I know ahead of time that the bread that I'm making doesn't do well with extra moisture added to it, I will just, while I'm getting everything else ready, I will put the fruit into a bowl and just let it rehydrate next to me while I'm getting everything else ready.
Okay, that sounds good. Do you have to be careful with the ratio of
I do.
liquid to,
Mm-mm.
no, you just kind of
No.
eyeball it?
Yeah, because you're not trying to replace volume. You're just trying to get it to where you can cook with it.
Okay.
If you need an exact volume, you need to spend the time weighing it before you dehydrate it, weigh it after, and that way you know approximately the amount of moisture that was removed from it, and then you start just a little bit below that and work your way back up to that. You don't want to just assume that putting that same volume back in is going to be exactly right, and you
Mhm.
may have to add a little more. That's one of those things you have to watch for. But for me, like when I'm baking with zucchini, I don't care about the moisture of the zucchini unless the recipe for the bread that I'm making says specifically use very dried out zucchini. Like they want you to wring out all the moisture. When I'm rehydrating the zucchini, I will then wring it out. It seems strange to do that than you didn't need to before, but you don't want to put dried zucchini in a recipe you've not tested and then assume that the moisture level in the recipe is going to be enough to rehydrate that zucchini, because what you may feel like you've got a lot of crunchy zucchini inside, or it's taken too much moisture out of the bread mix and you have dried bread or muffins because the zucchini was taking it all back, trying to rehydrate itself. So what I'll do is rehydrate it, and then I will I will then strain it to make sure that it's not really wet, which is what happens when you rehydrate zucchini, just to make sure that I'm getting that moisture level back to what the recipe says. After I've done it a couple of times, then I know, oh, I can play with it here and not have to rain out so much because we're good. That little extra moisture is not going to be a big deal. But when you're doing it for the first time, you always want to try to get as close to that recipe as you can, because that's how it was tested. And you don't want to add or take away moisture until you know what you can do. But for making pies and stuff, it doesn't really matter. You can rehydrate and however much water you have, add more to it if you found it absorbed too much and you still need to add a little bit more. And then the cool thing about that is if you have leftover water after, you use that water to cook with. So if I have the jar of vegetables that I put in the refrigerator and they've not rehydrated all the water because I used too much, that water is then used in whatever I'm cooking with if I need it, or to make rice, because it will have the vitamins that it did leach. I mean, it will leach some vitamins from your vegetables, just like if you soak them anytime. You just turn around and use that water in something that you're cooking with later, so you're not wasting that either. If you were trying to do a meal, like say that you decided that you were going to create some kind of pasta dish that you can dehydrate for the trail, that is one where you want to be more specific about the water content, because you don't want to add too much water to it where then it gets really watery and soupy, when that may not be what your intent was with the maybe you made some spaghetti or with egg noodles. You don't want it to be runny, because then it doesn't taste good. It tastes like water. So again, that's one of those things where you weigh it beforehand, you dry it, you weigh it after, and that way you know about how much water you want to put in to rehydrate. Always knowing you may have to add a little bit more water, because it won't always necessarily come back the exact same ratio, but at least you're getting it close and you're not adding way too much. And if you didn't add enough, you can always add a little bit more.
So I'm kind of fascinated by these powders, because I know
Sure.
that you really do a lot with powders. So talk to me about powders and how you use those in your food.
My biggest one is green. It's basically a green powder or a vegetable powder. I take all the dark leafy greens that I can get my hands on, dry them all, and I will store them as a powder form, which I just run through either a bullet blender or a big blender, depending on how much volume I'm trying to do at the time. And I store them both as whole leaves and as powder, because what I try to do is not powder things to store. I powder things to use in a month or two, because the more that you process a food, the faster it's going to lose its nutrients. So I don't want to have a bunch of powder stored up that starts to lose its nutrients that I can't eat quickly. So I keep the whole ones there, because also what I'll do is just like reach in, grab a handful, crush it in the meal, and it's, put greens in. There's almost spinach in everything that we eat in some form or another. It's either in whole pieces or it's in the powder. And I'll powder it up. Then what I do is I just take some and add it to everything I cook. So every food that my family gets that came off the stove is probably going to have some kind of powder in it, mostly green, because we don't eat greens in this house. We don't like them cooked, and salads are not the favorite thing for most of the family. I eat them, but most everybody else doesn't. Depending on the food, you want to always start with a little bit and work your way up, because powders can get especially green, can get overwhelming pretty quickly, and it can color the dish that you're putting it into. So there have been plenty of times that I've accidentally gotten too much in the eggs, and I'm feeding my kids green eggs that day because it's like, I got a little too much in there, sorry. But for my youngest son, it's also an issue of he can start to tell when it gets a little too much and he won't eat it, because like now it tastes too green and I don't want it. So I make notations, like I just always know that whatever meal I'm having, how much I can get away with putting in there. So I start by, depending on what the meal is, start with a teaspoon, add it in there, see if it changes the color. If you taste it and you can taste the green, that's when I start knowing that, okay, that's enough, no more, because you don't want to taste a meal that tastes like spinach or tastes like kale when you didn't intend for that meal to taste like kale. The same goes with vegetable powders. What I do is I dry vegetables, and I have I'm going to take this, is I have this soup jar that I keep that are just all the vegetables that I dry. I will mix them together like this, get that in the frame. And I can take scoops of this and just put it into anything that we're making. This is what my shepherd's pie, this is the mix that I put in there. Or I'll make specific vegetables on their own. And then over time, if I find I'm not using them quickly enough and it's time to rotate through and get a fresher batch in, I will take those vegetables, throw them all together and powder them. And I use them the same way that I do the green powder. I just scoop it into a meal that we're making And it adds extra nutrients, it adds the fiber, and it adds all those things without having to actually taste them or having the texture, which is the bigger issue for my youngest son, is texture. It allows me to add nutrients where we wouldn't have gotten those nutrients ever before. So it's the way, especially with them, that they have such a finite list of foods that they'll eat. This is the way for me to get all those vegetables in that they would never touch on their own. It's in their food already. They all know it. I don't hide the fact that I do it. They were raised knowing that mom puts stuff in everything, because I think it's important that they know that that's what I'm doing, and not hide it. But being raised on that, they don't know any better. So when they go to other people's houses, it's like they don't get that. But here, you're going to get that in the food. I add, like when I'm making chicken salad, I will add green powder into an set parsley. So it's not like they know that they're not getting parsley, they're getting dark leafy greens. I will add it to eggs. I add it to every stovetop meal I do. I add it to my bread. Sometimes when I'm making like quick breads, I will add some vegetable powder into it, because that just sticks more in there. It just makes it a little more nutrient dense than what it might have been before. And that's important for me, is to get the density of the nutrition in any place I can do it.
I love that. I think that is so incredible. And what mom out there is not trying to get a little bit more vegetables into their family? Like, I can see that. I mean, make a meatloaf and you can put greens right in it. Nobody's going to know it's there. Nobody can even taste it. But I would imagine you could even tuck some different vegetables into some of your baked goods. You were talking about zucchini bread.
Yeah.
Oh, a little scoop of greens right into that. Nobody would even know it was there. Wow. Darcy, thank you so much for helping us with just some practical applications and just helping to rehydrate things. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they would like to hear more from you?
I am at the Purposeful Pantry everywhere. That's the name of my website, where I have all of my processes and recipes. I'm on YouTube and on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not on TikTok yet. That's one of those things I'll probably have to get to at some point, but
that's okay.
That's where I am.
I'm not either. I don't TikTok. Sorry, if you like TikTok, you'll have to try TikTok without me. So thank you so much, Darcy.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was a lot of information. And if you're interested in really getting Darcy's step-by-step teaching about how to dehydrate foods the right way so that you absolutely love it, you're going to want to check out her class over at School of Traditional Skills. I will give you a link for that in your show notes, but make sure you go say hi to Darcy, thank her for showing up and having this conversation here. And you guys, I will see you very soon. So thanks for hanging out. Goodbye.